The sovereignty of the nation is a phrase invoked by almost every political faction in nearly every country, and it's usually leveraged as a sweeping justification for large-scale political directives, and it works. It's such a powerful framing of propaganda because there seems to be a natural instinct for us to value autonomy in both a broad and granular context, for both our country and for ourselves. When this type of language is used, we place our individual perception of positive autonomy, what it means to us, and then we overlay it onto the words of those using it. They don't have to explain any further, we get the message. To a leftist, it means the pursuit of egalitarianism or whatever. To a conservative, it might mean something like a strong border. What the messenger truly means doesn't actually matter. Whatever it means to each conservative or liberal doesn't even matter. They all attribute the best of intentions to it, so long as it comes from their side, of course. But instead of thinking past the sale and projecting our own personal meaning of something as fundamental as sovereignty onto those vague words, I want to lay out what we should understand a sovereign nation to be through a right-wing lens, as well as the actions that would help us achieve this sovereignty. For something to even be sovereign, it must be unified in its composition. Without a coherent makeup, the collective mass becomes disjointed and unable to synthesize a singular interest. A nation is both its land and people. These are each supplementary, but the people are far more significant to the union. We are a specific people who inhabit a specific land. That is a nation. That's our definition of a nation that we must establish as a principle. And the demographic change in America has now finally fractured the composition of the people to the point where we no longer have a cohesive collection of Americans. Through this replacement, we now can't even discern what's in the interest of an American because we don't know what an American really is. What we do know is that we've been flooded with so many non-Americans that there are now plenty of people within the US who have obvious allegiances and priorities beyond this country. So our first, most fundamental problem to solve is a return to a populace that is firstly American. And the only mechanism to achieve this will be remigration. And we must begin here because definitionally, if we wish to be a nation at all, it will require a landmass inhabited by Americans. The term ethnostate is used fairly often these days, and it's viewed quite unfavorably by mainstream culture. But did you know that this term wasn't even used prior to the mid-1980s? And the reason for that is because the definition of an ethnostate, a state which is dominated by a particular racial or ethnic group, was the original definition for a nation to begin with. This is not some new trail being blazed. It is merely a rejection of the propaganda and a return to the natural world. And if this return isn't achieved, we simply don't have a nation anymore. It's definitional. I'm not going to lay it out any further for those on the left. It's a pointless clarification given that it's axiomatic. Anything corrective that is not specifically meant to achieve this outcome is merely a band-aid on cancer. We can recover from fiscal nonsense. We simply can't recover from this and continue to be a nation. So if we could establish a nation made up of only those with a rightful claim to American status, we would then be able to deal with the next action item. There can be no more dual citizens in this country. There must be zero doubt who our citizens are loyal to. If you have multiple passports but you are a verifiable American, we will happily let you renounce your other citizenship and stay. Or you can leave. This is again definitional. A sovereign country can't have factions that hold allegiances to other nations. For a thing to be sovereign, it requires a unified commitment from all its components. The arms and legs may behave differently, but they serve the same body and mind. It's astounding that this is even controversial. And what's even more insane is the fact that there are American politicians holding office that have actually served in foreign militaries. We cannot allow this to continue. These two actions alone would restore an enormous amount of solidarity to this country. And if you don't start with liberal presuppositions, they aren't actually even controversial. Now, without diving too deep into an economic proposal, there's a very simple operational line that we can draw, which will be just as crucial for maintaining our independence. Under no circumstance should a non-American be allowed to purchase property in the United States. This has destroyed the state of things more than most can even understand. If we assume for the sake of argument that America is still the most desirable country to live in, then that by default makes its most desirable cities the most desirable cities, not just for Americans, but to the entirety of the world. That being the case, Americans are then no longer just competing against other wealthier Americans for some NYC condo. It's now a battle against ourselves, as well as the Saudis, the Chinese, whoever. And what does that do? It makes these places that much more unattainable to the people that are from here. But that obviously doesn't just happen in the high-end places. It happens everywhere. If behind every American applying for an apartment lease there's infinite third worlders chomping at the bit, perhaps even while being subsidized by our own government, then the demand skyrockets. This is basic stuff. But if we could remove the pressures that are bearing down on every American at all times of the day, then maybe we have a shot at some sort of equilibrium. Restoring our nation to be what a nation has always historically been, and weeding out all the inherent conflicts of interest would solve so many of our problems. Again, none of this should even be considered controversial. America is for the Americans. Our country should be inhabited by Americans, served by and for Americans, and ultimately owned by Americans. Let's start with those principles first.